All right, we are going to get started. If anybody else wanders in, they're free to. Thank you all for coming back. As you've noticed, I've come up with a hopefully novel solution to my laryngitis that I'm still struggling with, and that I'm mic'd tonight, so that if my voice does start to go, hopefully you'll still be able to hear me. I did also realize last time, as I was pointing out all the books and everything that I brought for people to look through and see if there's anything that strikes your fancy as far as follow-up. And I was looking at the stack as we were putting them all away, and fortunately the Case for Christ was in there, but none of the rest of my Lee Strobel books were in there, including the Case for Creator, which is what these first two classes are based on. And I went home and realized there's a whole big stack that I'd forgotten to put in the box. So they're all here now. So if anybody wants to look through, and there's a lot of Lee Strobel's works too. The beautiful thing about what make his books so accessible is they're not written like scholarly books, they're interviews, because he was an investigative reporter, that's what he did. So all of his books are written in almost like question and answer format, like he's interviewing these experts about these different topics. And so it just makes it very, very readable and enjoyable. So I would recommend them, and like I said, I got several of them up here if you want to take a look through them at some point in time. So, you ever had one of those days where even the most mundane tasks in the world seem not to be working? That was my day today. I'm going to vent for a little bit. So, excuse me. We left here. We left here, and we were supposed to. My in-laws were buying 3 laptop computers, one for my mother-in-law, and they wanted, as a present for back to school, they were getting laptops for both of our kids because they need them for school assignments, and well, we can't afford them. And so they ordered them from Staples, and then we got a call from my father-in-law that said they were supposedly in, but they got an email that said the order was canceled, and so he was all confused. So we had to run up into Bel Air, and keep in mind this is right around 5 o'clock. What's Bel Air traffic like at 5 o'clock, right? Exactly. And so we had to drive into Bel Air to try to go to Staples, and we get there, and then we get the first thing, there's these only 2 people operating the registers, and we ask, well, where do we pick up online orders? And it's like, oh, well, we'll have to have associate help you as soon as we have somebody available. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And it's like, I have a class to get to. And so they finally come out and they try to help us, and then the guy goes and he looks through and he can't find the order anywhere. So then he calls somebody up and he says, well, apparently one of your computers is still on the way. That's not words. It's like, good news, bad news kind of thing. The other 2 apparently had big old scratches on them, and so they aren't going to sell them, and they just canceled the order. Well, are they going to replace them? Well, no, I don't think they're going to replace them. I don't know if they have them. So you have to call. You have to have your father-in-law who placed the order, call and talk about it with somebody. So basically, completely wasted trip. We went all the way into Bel Air and had to fight all that traffic and walked away completely empty-handed. And it was just one of those kind of days where every little thing was just not working out, and I could give you a whole list, but we should talk about the Case for Christ a little bit tonight. So welcome very much for coming back. Thank you for coming back. I do want to open up with a couple of notes. First of all, to let you know that tonight we are going to be talking about signs of design, ways you can look in the universe and in biology and see elements of design that indicate that these things look like they were designed by someone, by a mind. Now, as a result, that means that we're going to be talking a lot of science again tonight, but this is kind of the last one. So one thing I want to encourage people about is that if you're sitting here and science isn't your thing, the whole class is not science, okay? The beautiful thing about these arguments for Christ is that they really are multifaceted, is that Romans 1:20 tells us that basically if you look at the creation, it's going to bear his fingerprint. Well, what that means is you can look in a lot of different ways at the creation, and it's going to show signs of God, show signs of Christ. So like next week, for example, we're going to be talking more about history and how historians do their research and uncover documents. So every week's going to be a little bit different. Week 6 is actually going to be philosophy, because that's going to be fun. That's my favorite class because that's my bailiwick, and that's when I get to go off the deep end because Lee Strobel doesn't really do philosophy, so that's going to be that's why I add stuff like that. Plus, like I said, and somebody mentioned this last week, one of the biggest arguments that people raise against Christianity and against God's existence is, how can there be a loving God if there's so much evil in the world? And that's a philosophical question. And so we kind of need to tackle the philosophical arguments if we're going to tackle that question. And I would not be doing my job if I let you all leave this class without us addressing that question. So that's going to build up a suspense for week 6. So again, if you do miss a class, they are on YouTube. Last week I said I didn't know when they were going to be up, but we kind of have that sorted out. It looks like Friday, 9 a.m. With the rest of the schedule is when we're going to be able to get these things up and available to you. So if you miss one, or if you want to share it with somebody else, I mean, it's really neat. We've had a couple people comment on the video that went up, so that's kind of flattering. One person that commented, and I don't know if it was anybody here, it was just like a first name, I can't remember who it was, and it was like a master's thesis, was the length of the comment. And I try to respond to just about everything, but if that person is watching again right now, you have my apologies right now. I just don't have the time. I'm not going to be able to respond to every point like that. So I would encourage those of you that are here in the class, if you have questions, stop me, interrupt me. That's why I give you the materials, because if we don't get through everything, you still have it to take home. I'd much rather have you understanding as best we can what we do get to go over than try to rush through and get through everything, all right? So let's talk a little bit tonight about design. I closed last week with kind of a tease, and this is what I was teasing. It was a gentleman by the name of William Paley wrote a book called Natural Theology in 1802. And this is the argument that he raised. The direct quote's on the screen. It's in your book. It says, in crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that, for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever. Nor would it perhaps be very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But suppose I had found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think of the answer I had before given, that for anything I knew the watch might have always been there. There must have existed at some time, at some place or other, an artificer or artificers who formed the watch for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. Every indication of contrivance, every manifestation of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater or more, and that in a degree which exceeds all computation. So what is William Paley saying here? He's saying, look, every element that makes up a watch, you can find in nature, all right? It's not like we manufacture everything that we create in this world from prior pre-existing things that we can find in nature. But there's something different about the watch than from the stone. And that's, you can look at that watch and see how the gears mesh, and it has the second hand that takes exactly 1 minute to go around. And you can recognize there's something different about that watch than about the stone that makes it so you can look at the stone and say, hey, for all I know, the stone's been there forever, but you wouldn't say the same thing about the watch because you recognize someone must have made that, all right? And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Different things we can look at. Now, I want to give you another example, and I apologize because I like to give credit. I want to say this comes from Robin Collins, you'll see him in the video here in a little bit, but I'm not 100% positive, so I'm giving the wrong credit to this. I apologize. But let's pretend that you go to the planet Mars, and on the planet Mars you find a biodome, all right? And you go in there, and it's completely empty. There's nobody there. But there's a control room, and you go into the control room, and there's a whole series of dials. And one controls, atmospheric pressure, the amount of oxygen. Maybe there's even a gravity device control, artificial gravity control in there. And you look at all these dials, and you notice that every single one of them is set precisely where it needs to be in order for you to be able to survive inside that biodome. Now, are you going to think that just happened by random chance? That forget the construction of the biodome itself. Let's just talk about the setting of those dials. Are you going to think those dials somebody's went in there and spun them around like Wheel of Fortune, and they all happened to end up at precisely the right spot that was necessary to create an atmosphere capable of sustaining life? Not likely, because the odds of that are overwhelming. And so that's what we're going to see talk a little bit about tonight, is if you think about, keep that analogy in mind, especially for the first half of the class tonight, all right? Keep that analogy in mind. That's going to help you, I think, a little bit understanding the information that's being thrown at you. Think of it as if all of creation has a certain set of dials that have to be set to a particular setting, and if they were set anywhere else, we wouldn't exist, all right? Bear that in mind. If you want to come up here, there's new packets for supplements for this week. If you were here last week, then if you weren't, then grab one of the folders. And there's name tags and a sign-in sheet as well. See, this is why I'm mic'd this week, because the voice is already going. It is me, but all right. So there's going to be 2 videos tonight. The good news is the combined total of them is a little longer than the combined total for last week, so I'll get to rest my voice a little bit more. The first one is going to be talking about design out there in the cosmos, okay? So we're going to go ahead and start that one right now, and I will go ahead and I'll walk back here in a second, and I'll turn off the lights so you can see it a little better. So let me give you the fancy term, and then we'll ignore that for the rest of the class, all right? The big word here is teleological, the teleological argument. It just means designed. I mean, that's all, because sometimes I guess scholars need to feel like they're earning their paychecks, and so they use the big words. It's the design argument, all right? And basically what it says is, just like we can infer design from looking at the watch or looking at the biodome, those examples I gave you at the beginning of class, we can also infer it by looking at creation, at the universe in this case. All right? Now, it's very important before you start looking into this argument to know what it does not claim. And this is a theological point for, I didn't ask this at the beginning of last week's class, and I don't want to ask in the sense that I don't want people to feel free to answer. It's entirely possible, because I know somebody came up to me last week and said, I talked to my friend who's an atheist and tried to get him to come to the class. And if that's the case, that's perfectly fine. So if there's anybody here or anybody you want to invite that isn't a believer, perfectly welcome. I got no problem with that. If you are, then this should sound familiar, in the sense that part of what Christianity teaches is the fall. All right? We believe that with Adam and Eve, all of creation fell into sin. All right, and then there's going to be eventually, a new heavens and a new earth that's created. So part of Christian theology is the world ain't perfect. All right, so we don't claim that that if we look at the design of the universe, we should be able to find evidence of a perfect design. I give you a passage here from Romans chapter 8. It says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God." That's Romans chapter 8, verses 19 and through 21. The argument from design does not claim that all aspects of the created order, everything you see out there, is going to be perfect. In fact, if we did look out there and see everything was just so perfectly created, it would actually run contrary to what Scripture teaches us. Because then we'd be saying, well, wait a minute, if everything's so perfect, where's this fall that Genesis says happened? There is enough design evident at multiple levels of nature to infer that there is a designer. However, there's also enough evidence of deformity, decay, and disease, indicating that the design is often less than optimal. That's Douglas Groothuis, a Christian apologist, quote. Even if you look at a watch, all right, and it's not an optimally functional watch, you can still tell that it's designed. I mean, there are some watches that are more impressive than others, right? It doesn't prevent you from looking at the less impressive ones and still concluding they had to have been designed by somebody. All right, same thing as we're seeing here. because that's one of the biggest responses that a lot of skeptics will say, is they will point to, and we'll touch more about this maybe later, but they'll point to instances where they think the design is less than optimal, or I could have done better than that. Well, but that's actually consistent with what our argument is. You need to understand that when you're looking at it. So the question then is, we all hopefully can see a difference between the watch you find on the ground and the rock you find on the ground. And so we recognize, okay, I can tell that the watch was designed where maybe the rock was not, but how do we kind of wrap our minds around that? It's kind of like a gut feeling. How do we make it more than a gut feeling? Well, William Dembski proposes 3 ways that you recognize design. Number 1, what he calls contingency. Number 2, complexity. And number 3, specificity. We'll talk about what each one in just a second and what they mean. But you have to understand that each one is necessary but not individually sufficient. In other words, before you can reasonably conclude that something was designed, you need all 3. You can't just, because you can find things in nature that might exhibit one or another one of these. But if you got all 3, it's a pretty strong argument that this thing is not something that has occurred naturally. This had to be created by a designer. What does contingency mean? Contingency means it cannot be explained by automatic natural processes. No matter how long you wait, you're never gonna, all the elements, even if you were to take all of the gears already made, all right? Everything, all the ingredients you need for a watch, and you put them in a box, they're never going to, through any natural forces, form themselves into a watch. I gave the example of a video that my daughter and I did a year ago, I guess now, maybe, last summer, where my son had just built a Lego airplane. It was like an Angry Birds airplane or something like that, one of those Lego kits you can get. And I use the example, it's like, you know what? Even if I took all of the Legos that are necessary to build this plane, and I put them in a big old can, even if I start shaking that can up all the time, I'm not gonna be able to open the lid, reach in, and pull out an airplane. Because there's no natural laws that are gonna bring all those things together in order to form that, all right? That's what contingency means. Complexity. The greater the complexity, the less the probability something is due to chance. It is possible that if I drop 2 Legos on the floor, they could fall in such a way that one links to the other one. So if that's all I'm trying to explain, is 2 Legos stacked on top of each other, maybe that's not quite a complex enough of a design for us to say that that couldn't have happened naturally. But I'm not gonna take all of the ingredients of that Lego airplane kit, drop them on the floor, and expect them to all hit in such a way that they form an airplane, all right? Because that's more of a complex design. So the more complex you get, the less likely it is to be due to chance. And the last one is specificity. It must exhibit a pattern that is more than merely improbability. The improbable pattern must be specified ahead of time, not after fact. This is a little bit confusing, but the example that he gives sometimes is snowflake. Snowflakes exhibit patterns, but it's more a matter of you look at it after the fact and recognize the pattern, as opposed to the airplane design, the Lego airplane design. That is not just a matter of repetition. It's a matter of, oh, I can see how this is all put together in such a way to create an airplane. All right. So that's what a specific design is. You can look at it and see, oh, this is here. There's a specific purpose behind this. All right. So all 3 of those things, then you can. Here's another example that he gives. All 3 of those things can indicate to you that something was probably designed. Another example of specificity about it being ahead of time. I don't know if you can see so well in this light, but a little dart just flew across the screen. I can hit the bullseye with a dart every single time. Every single time. You don't believe me? It's really easy if you throw the dart first, then draw the bullseye around it. That's what I mean by it has to be specified ahead of time. It's a lot harder to hit the bullseye when a bullseye's on there first. It's a lot easier to hit it if you get to throw the dart first. All right? And there's my little bullseye being drawn around my dart. All right. An objection that a lot of people, another very, very common objection that people raise to theists or Christians or anybody when they're making this kind of design argument is what's called God of the gaps. All right. What they'll say is, some people claim that when you're resorting to God as the explanation for these very specific things you see in creation, these very finely tuned settings of the universe. That's just arbitrarily jumping to God. So you see a gap in our knowledge, and so you say, well, I don't know what the answer to that is, so I'm just going to assume it's God. That's what the objection is anyway. The problem is it doesn't hold up, because is that really what we're doing? When you watch that whole video and they were laying out all of the evidence for design, were they saying, well, here's all these things we don't know, so we assume God did it? No, what they're doing is they're actually drawing that conclusion based upon what we do know. And they're saying if you look at what we do know, then an intelligent mind is the most logical explanation. It's what's called inference to the best explanation, all right? And this happens all the time. It's amazing the double standard people have sometimes. An inference to the best explanation is when you look at the evidence you do have and you say, hey, maybe even if I can't directly observe a phenomenon, I can look at the evidence we have and conclude that that phenomenon must be there because it's the best explanation for what we do see. And people try to say, Christians, you're just filling God in for the gaps. Well, you got a problem with that, because anybody heard of black holes? Guess what? Can you detect a black hole? Can you directly see a black hole? Anybody know the answer to that? No, you can't. This is from howstuffworks.com. It says, although we cannot see black holes, we can detect or guess the presence of one by measuring its effects on the objects around it. So you can't actually see a black hole, but you see all of these things happening around this area, and you can conclude, based on what you do see, a black hole must be there, because that's the only explanation for all these other stuff that I see that's going on, all right? Another one is dark matter. I always lead with black holes, because everybody's heard of black holes. Not everybody's heard of dark matter, all right? This is from actually NASA's website, and it says, we know that all matter attracts all other matter through a force called gravity. For those of you who don't know, we didn't really cover this too much last week, but gravity it's the larger an object's mass, the more it's going to attract something, the more the force of gravity is going to be felt, basically, to oversimplify it, obviously. But gravity is something that is related to mass. And so we know that all matter attracts all other matter through a force called gravity. When astronomers add up all the matter in all the stars and gas and dust visible with all different kinds of telescopes, it doesn't total nearly enough to explain the motions they observe. The stars are moving around much faster than they should be. In other words, all the matter we can see is not enough to produce the gravity that is pulling things around, all right? Does that make sense? The idea is that if you have, in order for, we can measure how fast something's traveling, et cetera, all right, and figure out what kind of gravitational force must be getting exerted upon that object, all right? And then we look at all the matter around it and say, well, is there enough matter there to produce that amount of gravity? And the answer is no, there's not. And so that has led scientists to conclude the existence of something called dark matter. Matter that's out there that we can't actually see, that is helping to produce these effects. But that's another example where you can't actually see dark matter, but scientists conclude that it's there based upon the effects that they see. Both of those are examples of scientists coming to an inference based upon the best explanation for the data that they do see. So here's an interesting question. If Christians or theists are committing God of the gaps when they propose a designer to explain all these things that look like they're designed, then are scientists committing a black hole of the gaps or a dark matter of the gaps because they're using the exact same type of reasoning? But it's an inconsistency there. Another little interesting note, you heard a little bit on the video that talked about the multiverse, all right, or multiple universes. And one of the gentlemen there said, well, there's only really one problem with it. And then he actually identified two, but that's nitpicking. But he said there's no evidence for it. But then he also said it also moves the problem up one level. So you just ask, okay, well, what created this multiple universe generating machine? That's two problems with it. But there's another problem with it, and it's kind of related to the first one, the lack of evidence for it. If we have evidence of the existence of our universe, which we do, we know there's one universe, all right, but we have no evidence whatsoever of any other universes out there, then on what basis do you conclude that multiple universes are even out there? That that's even a viable explanation? That is a classic example of a multiverse of the gaps. That is exactly what they're accusing us of. That's where you're coming up with what's called an ad hoc explanation. It's like, I don't have any actual evidence that this is true, but I'm just going to throw it out there and pretend like it is in order to avoid the implications of what you're saying. There's no evidence that it actually exists, and some would argue there cannot be there never can be any evidence that it actually exists because our observational skills are kind of limited to our own universe. You can't look outside your universe. That's getting hyper-technical. If you didn't follow that, don't worry about it. I'll just throw it away. But the idea is that is a gaps. That is exactly the same type of argument technique where it's like we're just making something up, basically in our own minds, that has no evidence to support it, and we're going to use that to deny the evidence that we do have. Right? That's not legitimate. All right, so let's talk about a couple of these examples that were covered on the video real quick. Excuse me. Remember the ruler that it showed you? It's the force of gravity. Now, does anybody know what gravity is? If you don't, do me a favor, stand up and jump. Okay, I'm assuming you actually started to do it. I'm so proud of my daughter. Anyway, so yeah, we all know what gravity is, at least fundamentally, right? And here's the issue, is it could have been, there's nothing in the universe that would require the force of gravity to be set where it is. You know, some people will try to say, well, maybe it just had to be that way. There's no evidence whatsoever that it couldn't have been different than what it is. And as a matter of fact, if you were to measure all the different possible strengths gravity could have theoretically been, and represent those as a ruler stretched from one end of the universe to the other, a distance of about 14 billion light years, right? And you were to take where gravity is set, and that's represented by 1 inch on that ruler. If you were to move it even just 1 inch compared to the entire length of that ruler, the entire width of the universe, anything larger than the size of a pea would be crushed, which means no life, no planets, no nothing. All right, like he said, maybe you might be able to get some single-cell organisms or something like that, but anything larger than a pea, gravity would just be too strong, for example, to actually sustain it. And they only talked about moving it one way. If you move it the other way, you've got the same kind of problem. Let's say you make it a little bit weaker. Remember I told you before that matter attracts matter? Well, we touched briefly last week on the cosmological constant, which is the rate of expansion of the universe, which also, actually maybe we didn't, they did. That wasn't last week, that was this week. I'm already confused. They talked about it. The cosmological constant is what controls the expansion rate, how fast the universe is expanding. All right, we did talk about the universe expanding last week. That's what I was thinking of. It has to be expanding at just the right rate, because if it's expanding too slowly, then all the matter is going to attract itself to itself, and it's going to crunch back in on itself, all right? And if it's expanding too quickly, then all matter is just going to spread apart too rapidly, and it's never going to be able to come together to form planets and stars and things like that. So you need to strike a little fine balance right in the middle, where it's not too strong, because if it's too strong, everything gets crunched, but it can't be too weak either, because if it's too weak, then everything just flies apart. All right. Same thing could be said about the force of gravity. If you were to change it and make it even slightly weaker, everything's going to fly apart. You still don't have life. All right. Speaking of the cosmological constant, see, I knew there was a reason I was thinking of it. It was the next slide. To show you how precise that is that I was just talking about, this is Robin Collins, the gentleman who was just on the video. All right. He says if we're not fine-tuned with an extremely narrow range, 1 part in 10 to the 53rd power, or even 10 to the 20th, 120th power, is that those are the theoretically possible range it could have had. The universe would either expand so rapidly that all matter would quickly disperse, or it could like crunch, like I was saying, one way or another. And even the more conservative estimate is 1 part in 10 to the 53rd power. Like a 1 with 53 zeros after it? Think about that for a second, all right? That's how precise that measurement had to be set in order for us to have a universe at all. To give you an example, to kind of, because sometimes you hear all these numbers and you just can't quite wrap your mind around it. The example they gave on the video is, imagine if you were to go hundreds of miles up into space and throw a dart down on the planet Earth, and you were to hit a bullseye, you don't get to draw the bullseye around it after you hit it this time, sorry. The bullseye's there to begin with, and you hit a bullseye the size, less than the width of an atom. That's how precise that cosmological constant is set, all right? That's just 2 of them. There are at least 30 total constants in the universe that are similarly finely tuned, all right? Those dials we talked about in the biodome, picture 30 of them that have to be set. We're not talking about your little oven dial where you have just, anywhere from 1 to, I never really took that high. How does that go, like 450 degrees, 500 degrees high? 500? Okay, I knew somebody would know. I just follow the directions. I assume that when I read the little packet of Pillsbury, biscuits, and it tells me to set it to 350, I assume my dial goes that high. That's about the extent of my knowledge with it. And then with my oven, I always have to reduce the amount of time anyway, because it always, you too? Okay, I'm not the only one, yay. I gotta cut 25% off the time they put on those packages. Otherwise the biscuits are brown. Nobody likes that. All right, man, my voice sounded really horrible there. All right, now here's the other thing that they touched on, but I don't think they quite brought home the significance of this point in the video, all right? Understand something. Let's assume that somehow you could explain away all those 30 constants of the universe, all right? Even if you could even if we had we lived in multiple universes, all right? Even though there's no evidence of that whatsoever. So you could come up with some explanation for how this universe got to be so finely tuned. That just is in reference, or that's just speaking to the laws of the universe that govern the universe as a whole. Even in a universe that is theoretically life permitting, the odds of us being here at all is still astronomical. So even if you had a universe that was capable of sustaining life, you still wouldn't expect to find life actually happening to exist in it. And the reason is there's a lot of things about this universe that also our location in the universe is just so perfect. Location, 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 right? The 3 important rules of real estate. First of all, understand there are different types of galaxies, all right? And our galaxy is what's called a spiral galaxy because it looks like a spiral. That's I said earlier that scholars like to come up with fancy terms. This time they didn't, so I'm happy about that. It's a spiral galaxy, all right? You need to have a spiral galaxy to begin with. All the other galaxies that aren't spiral, you're not going to have life in there. And the reason is this. If you look at, the picture's not great, but if you look at the spiral galaxy, you'll notice there's what appear to be these spiral arms that are a lot denser, and then kind of a little bit emptier space in between them. Well, where you see those dense spots, that's all stars, all right? That's what you're seeing, all these little bright lights. So there's a lot higher concentration of stars in those spiral arms than there are in between them. Now, there still are stars in between them, but not nearly as many. Now, what happens with stars is they age and then they blow up, all right? It's something called a supernova. Anybody think you want to be in the neighborhood when a supernova happens? Okay, good. See, that was the easy question of the night. No, of course not. And so if you are in an environment that has a lot more stars around it, guess what else you have? A lot more supernova, which means there's not going to be time for life to develop in those areas because you're going to get blown up before you have a chance for that to happen. All right? And so you have to have a spiral galaxy because in any of these other galaxies, there's too much unpredictability, too much concentration of stars. What happens is as a galaxy gets older and it's spinning because of gravity, it's spinning, 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 it forms itself into the spiral galaxy. But even in a spiral galaxy, you don't want to be in one of those spiral arms because you might as well just be in any other type of galaxy if you're in that, because those still have a very high concentration of stars and supernova. So you have to be situated in that little empty space in between the spiral arms, which of course is where we find ourselves. All right, and you have to have an orbit around the center of the galaxy that keeps you in that spiral, in that space between the spiral arms. A lot of stars actually travel across, like they'll be going through a spiral arm, and then they'll go through the empty part in between them, and then they'll cross into another spiral arm. That's the way their orbit carries them. All right, our star does not. It keeps us right in between those two spiral arms, so that's where we stay. Anytime you get in those high concentration of star areas, you're going to die. Let's put it that way. That's a simple way to think about it, all right? these are just some of the parameters that go into this. There are 75 approximately, or some of the research I've looked up, 75 similar parameters about our location within this universe that are necessary in order for life to exist. If you don't meet any one of them, you're not going to live. And the odds of that, the odds of finding one planet that meets all 75 parameters is about 1 chance in 10 to the 99th power. Here's the problem. According to scientists' best estimates, there's about 1 in 10, or about 10 to the 23rd number of planets in the universe. Well, you can do the math. Even if you can't do the math, just look at the two numbers. The fact of the matter is, there aren't enough planets in the universe to even expect to find one that meets all 75 parameters. Because there are fewer, if it's 1 chance in 10 to the 99 that you're even going to find one, and you only have 10 to the 23rd planets, it's kind of like saying that if I need, let's say my chances of hitting the jackpot on the latest scratch off, I have a 1 in 300 chance of winning $2 on the latest scratch off, and I go out and buy 10 tickets. Would you expect me to win the scratch off? No, because the odds are against me because I didn't buy enough tickets to meet the odds. It's the same thing with the number of planets in the universe. There aren't enough planets in the universe to meet the odds of expecting to find even one that meets all the parameters necessary for life. You didn't buy enough lottery tickets. Yeah.
Question for you. So do people like then talk about, when you're talking about life, being human beings, and, animals like we know it, do people like then say, well, what about aliens, or come up with things that we haven't,
That is such a brilliant question. It was actually the next thing I was going to say. We're thinking alike there, see? It's not on the slides even, so you couldn't have looked at the materials. Yes. And let me tell you, people do ask me from time to time, well, Ken, would your faith in God be jeopardized if we found out there was alien life? And the answer to that is, heck no. That would make my faith in God even stronger. Now, do I think there's alien life? My gut feeling, probably not. Why not? Because of these odds, all right? And I just look at these odds and say, the odds are we shouldn't even be here, so we certainly wouldn't expect to find a second planet. But if there is a second planet out there where life has also developed, that means these odds were bucked twice. And that just makes the argument even stronger that someone must have been designing the universe in such a way to allow people to win those 2 winning lottery tickets and not just 1. All right? So yeah, good question. Real good question. All right. Any questions about that? That's talking about looking at design in the universe itself. What we're going to turn to next is looking for design in biology. We've gone from the big, and now we're going to look at the small. So, but before we do that, I wanted to open up any other questions from anybody. All right, well, then we're going to watch our next video. This is the point in the class for the next 30 seconds where my voice works, because I've gotten arrested for 15 minutes or so, but it won't last that long. All right, I kind of say sometimes when we, it's already starting to go, look at that. I kind of say, after we watch these videos, say, okay, now we're going to dig deeper. For this one, I think I kind of say, well, now we're going to explain what you just saw, because it's a little bit, this is, out of everything you're going to do in the 6 weeks of this class, I think this segment was the most, if you're not disciplined in biology, some of this may have brought back nightmares from, primary school or something, I don't know. But let's try to keep it simple, all right? Because again, like I mentioned last week, what we're going for here are understanding the basic concepts. You don't need to know the specifics. You don't need to be a scientist to understand the general concepts behind these arguments. Think of the mousetrap. All right, the traditional mousetrap, the picture we have on the screen, has a number of different components to it. Now, imagine if you were to have a mousetrap and I were to take away the spring. Would the mousetrap work? No. Even though you have every other element to it, if you don't have the spring, it's not going to work. Same thing, if I take away that wooden base, so you don't have anything to attach everything else to, are you going to be able to have even a partially functioning mousetrap? See, that's the point, is if you take away any one element, it's not like you have a slightly less efficient mousetrap. You've got junk. You've got garbage. You've got nothing that's of any use to you whatsoever. All right, that's the analogy to remember when you're looking at this information from the first part of the video we just watched, is the mousetrap. It kind of helps you wrap your mind around it. I do want to say that no mice were actually harmed in the making of that video, if anybody was worried about that little guy. If you looked closely, it was a wind-up thing, and it was computer animated. It's all good. It's all good. All right. All right. So one of the things I talked about in the video was something called a bacterial flagellum. Anybody here have a boat? You got a boat? So yeah, I grew up with a boat. I don't have a boat right now, but my parents did when I was growing up. We used to go water skiing all the time. And we had an outboard motor on our boat. Well, we had a couple different boats, but they all were outboards, as I recall. But you understand the basic concept of how a motor works, all right? You've got all the inner workings that cause it to spin around in order to move your boat through the water, all right? Well, a bacterial flagellum is the same thing, all right? It's basically a motor that's attached to the bacteria that propels it throughout the body, all right? Operating the same way as a motor does. But just like if you were to go into your outboard motor and take out one piece of it, you're not going to have most likely, you're going to ruin your motor, all right? Don't do this as an experiment, but you're going to ruin your motor. It's not going to work, all right? That's why when one part goes bad, you got to call the repair shop and say, hey, how long till you get this part in so I can go back out of my boat, right? Same kind of thing here. If you take away any one part of the bacterial flagellum, it's just like that mousetrap. You have something completely non-functional, all right? You don't have something that's maybe limping its way through the body, maybe not going as fast. It doesn't move at all. Or one of the other things, it doesn't even form itself at all. All right. It's important to remember what natural selection supposedly is, all right? According to the theory of natural selection, things that are useful for survival are quote-unquote selected, although that terminology is actually problematic. I mean, if you think about it, to say something selected, doesn't that imply there's someone doing the selecting? Selection means a choice is being made, so the language is kind of not really on par with what the ideas they're trying to convey. But the idea being is that nature, whatever that means, selects things that promote survival and weeds out those things that don't, all right? So for these irreducibly complex systems like the bacterial flagellum, it only becomes useful once all of the parts are in place. So you can't have something like this flagellum develop by first having one part of it, and then sometime later the next part comes and joins up, and then sometimes later the next part comes and joins up, because during that entire process, it's useless. And if it's useless, according to natural selection, it's not going to be chosen for survival. It's going to be weeded out, it's going to be eliminated. And so there'll never be the chance for all of these pieces to come together. The only way these types of things can work is if everything comes together at the same time, all right? Because if they come together at the same time, now we have a functioning motor. Now we have a functioning mousetrap, all right? But that is not what Darwinian evolution teaches. That's not what natural selection says happens. So that's why this is being proposed as a problem for natural selection, all right? Now we do know something else that can make a motor, and that's intelligence. Think about it. Every other motor you see here in the world, well, how was it created? By a person who came up with a design and constructed the motor, right? So that's why we look at these two possible explanations and we say, okay, and keep in mind, I want to emphasize this point too, that the arguments in favor of the existence of God, which is what we've been talking about last week or what we're talking about this week, the best way to look at them is cumulatively. In other words, the arguments don't they can stand on their own, but even if let's say you're weighing these two options. Well, do I think this flagellum thing, this motor, was created by natural selection, or do I think it was created by an intelligent mind? All right, when you're making that choice, part of what you have to be bearing in mind is all this other evidence that we've already shown for the existence of an intelligent mind out there, for the existence of God. Because part of these guys are like, wait a minute, I got to contend with all of that. If I'm going to try to, because I know from all this other evidence that it certainly does seem plausible that there is an intelligent mind, an intelligent agent behind the universe. Knowing that might make it a little easier to say, okay, so that is a viable option for me to be considering here. So if you're looking at these two options, you're saying which one could explain these phenomena we're seeing in biology. We know an intelligence could because we have plenty of examples of intelligence creating these types of systems. Could natural selection do it? Well, according to these scientists, the answer is no, because it couldn't be created piece by piece over time. A couple other, yeah.
I got a question.
Sure.
So a child with disability, just say autism. So when that child's born, is this in his DNA?
Is what in his DNA?
The autism.
Yeah, now, I'm not a medical doctor, but my understanding is yes. And the question for those who didn't hear it is, if you have a child born with autism, is the autism in their DNA? And the answer to that is yes. But this gets back to what we were saying at the beginning of the class, all right, is that we do live in a fallen world. I mean, you could use any disease here. It doesn't have to be autism. Insert any disease you want to at this point. I mentioned last week, I think we're having some health issues. It's been public knowledge my mother-in-law is dealing with cancer right now and having a lot of complications, a lot of things not going our way in that regard. But because what we understand the universe to be in from a Christian perspective is that we live in a fallen world, we're not looking for optimal design. We're not looking for signs that everything's perfect. But even in someone with autism, the amount of DNA is so, in the amount of, take an example, the amount of information that's in their DNA, you still have enough specified information in there to create a human being. And that amount of information is just unfathomable to consider that that could have happened by random chance. Now, it's not perfect, you're right, there's problems in it like there is with any disease mechanism, but that just shows that we're living in a fallen world. You still have to explain all the rest of the perfectly fine DNA that you find in a person with autism or any type of disease.
Okay, but when you get cancer, okay, this is something that you weren't born with, maybe, and then you're diagnosed with breast cancer or whatever.
You may have had a genetic predisposition to it, potentially. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, if we knew the cause of cancer, then maybe we wouldn't be dealing with it so much right now, but there's certainly a lot of things there. Yeah.
I would say, though, that also leads to the implausibility of the survival of the fittest. Because autism, as the example, is actually increasing, not decreasing. And if it really is a survival of the fittest, you would expect then some of these things to be decreasing.
And the idea is that it goes against the survival of the fittest because we're seeing increasing numbers of autism, which should be weeded out.
And maybe that's a poor example, but any kind of, something that would cause you to be sort of less functional.
Yeah, well, it does create problems, I'll tell you, from a moral perspective, and we'll talk more about this, like I said, in week 6. But some people try to explain morality through evolutionary type explanations, and they'll try to say that I think the reason moral rules are what they are is just because it's morality is what promotes the survival of a society, and what is moral is something that promotes the survival of a society. Well, if that were true, then we shouldn't have any moral prohibitions against killing off every baby that's born with autism. But I would hope that would make everybody squirm in this room and say, no, you can't do that. And yet, if morality is just survival of the fittest, why not? Why wouldn't you be able to? We'll talk more about that in week 6, but that's getting back to the moral argument of God, how morality actually shows the existence of God as well. Because we're short on time, I won't go into all of the specifics of all these things, but it's in your material somewhat that there are other examples of irreducible complexity as well. These all exhibit similar type of issues as the bacterial flagellum, the human eye, something called cilia, which are actually kind of like oars that roast things through the body. It's kind of cool. And the blood clotting system. The blood clotting system is a classic, what's called a Rube Goldberg machine. Think of not the mousetrap we saw on the screen, but think of the game mousetrap, where one thing causes the next thing to happen, causes the next thing to happen, causes the next thing to happen. That's your blood clotting system. And now imagine if you were playing, there's a reason why in that game you have to put all the pieces together, because until you get all the pieces on the board, the mousetrap doesn't work. All right? Same thing with the blood clotting system. All right. Could there some responses to irreducible complexity? Could there be a gradual process that we're not just aware of yet? This is the God of the gaps thing that we were talking about earlier, right? Some people say, well, by resorting to a designer, by saying an intelligent mind did all of this, all you're doing is kind of inserting. Maybe there's an explanation, a naturalist explanation that we just don't know about yet, all right? Well, what's the problem with that? It's the same thing we talked about in the first half of the class. Where's your evidence? See, I got to, remember I mentioned earlier that there was a gentleman who posted a comment to last week's video, and it was like I said, a master's thesis. It was extremely long, and I can't respond to everything, but one of the things, as I recollect, that he said in there, he objected to the Coughlan cosmological argument that we talked about last week, and basically his point was, even though everything we see clearly has a cause, everything that comes into existence has a cause, it's still theoretically possible that something could, come into existence that doesn't have a cause. Even if we have all the evidence to the contrary, that doesn't logically mean it's impossible for something to come into existence without a cause. And they're right. That doesn't mean it's logically impossible. Just like all of the evidence we've seen so far doesn't mean it's logically impossible. Maybe there's a naturalistic explanation for all this all happens, and we just don't know it yet. But just because it's possible for you to think something doesn't mean it's rational for you to think that, or doesn't mean it's reasonable for you to think that. If all of the evidence we do have points in one direction, and you want to say, I'm going to ignore all that and go in the other direction, well, you're free to do that if you want, and I can't stop you. But that doesn't mean that's a reasonable conclusion to make. The reasonable conclusion is to say, all right, at least for now, I'm going to go with where the evidence is pointing. Now, I'm going to keep an open mind. And if at some point in the future the evidence points a different way, then I'm more than willing to reconsider my conclusions. But it's not rational to just automatically refuse to go where the evidence is pointing, merely because it's possible that something might come up in the future. That's what this explanation does. That's what that gentleman's explanation did, I think, with the Coughlan cosmological argument. It's like, no, keep an open mind, but we should be able to look at the evidence we have and say, what does that tend to indicate? I'll skip the next one because that's basically what we just talked about. All right, another one I want to touch on really quickly in the last few minutes we've got is a classic response to the mousetrap analogy. And what Kenneth Miller says, all right, you know what? Maybe it's possible that these elements that make up the mousetrap, yes, they have to come all together and work as one in order to be a mousetrap. But it's possible that they're all serving some other purpose until they come to be formed as a mousetrap. For example, that wood base to the mousetrap would make an awfully nice paperweight. All right? So maybe it's functioning as a paperweight until such time as it comes to be part of the mousetrap. And to some extent, there's some support for this. There's at least one part of the flagellum, what's called the cellular pump, that you do see in other parts of the organism. Okay? It's called the co-option theory. Here's the same problem. Where's the evidence? There's no evidence whatsoever of that happening. And logistically speaking, there's some problems with that too, if you think about it. If something's in a properly, fully functioning system and it's serving a purpose, why would it be moved over to another purpose? So there's some logistical issues with that, just thinking about it. But again, it's the same kind of thing. It's an ad hoc explanation. There's no evidence that this happens in the body whatsoever, but we're just going to propose, well, maybe this happens. Well, the moment you find evidence that happens, then come back and talk to me. But until then, based on the evidence we do have, that doesn't appear to be the case. Doesn't appear to be the case. What all this boils down to is that the objections we see that are raised are based upon a philosophy, not science, not evidence. If you go into this, and I mentioned this briefly last week at the beginning, is that if you go into this evidence with an open mind and without certain starting assumptions, then you're going to see where it leads. But if you go into it with a starting assumption that everything must be explained naturally, then that's when you're going to resort to explanations like this. It's like, well, maybe this, well, maybe that, well, maybe this. Well, the only reason you're saying that is because you're closing the door to certain types of explanations before you even do the investigation. And that's not logical, that's not reasonable. The beautiful thing about theism, about the belief in God, is that our minds are open to any of the explanations. There's plenty of things in this world, and we don't go around saying God did everything. I got news for you. If I go and trip on the sidewalk on my way out tonight and skin my knee, I'm not going to say, God, why'd you do that to me? I'm going to say I was stupid for not looking where I was walking. All right? And the natural law of gravity made me fall. So From a theistic perspective, we are open to both naturalistic explanations and supernatural explanations. But if you rule God and take God out of the picture, then you're only open to naturalistic explanations, and that's what causes you to not follow where the evidence is leading. Real quickly, because about the second half of that video with DNA, we didn't have a whole lot of time left to go through all of that, but think of it like this. I used to go to Skyline Drive back before my kids were born. We used to go there every fall. Imagine if I went to Skyline Drive down to Virginia, and we're going up to our campsite, and there spelled out in rocks on the side of a hill, it says, "Welcome to Skyline Drive, Ken Coughlan." Now, everything in there is made up of rocks, which are all over the place up there in the mountains, right? But are you going to think that that's a naturally existing rock formation? No. And this gets into what he was talking about as far as the New York Times example. Even naturalistic explanations might be able to explain the rocks being there. But there's more, it's more than just rocks being present. There's information being conveyed there. So that information transcends the material objects that are there, right? You don't just explain the newspaper by explaining how the ink got on the page. You have to explain how the letters were formed in such a way that it's communicating something that's capable of being understood. That's what we find in DNA. DNA is information. And so if you look at the DNA molecules, they're conveying information to you. It's not enough just to explain how the molecules themselves got there. You have to explain how they got organized in such a way to convey this information. And the amount of information you see in DNA far outweighs anything that you can possibly imagine in the natural world. All right? We know other examples of how information gets conveyed. You see a book, you got an author. All right? What other possible explanation is there for the amount of information that's conveyed in the DNA? All right, that's a real quick overview of the last part because we're out of time, so I apologize for that. But if you have any questions about that, you want to come and talk to me afterwards, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, this is why I gave you the materials. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Hey, those of you that don't like science, congratulations, you made it. Next week, no science, I promise. All right, history. We're talking history. All right, so this is a special YouTube bonus. Because the class ended, we didn't have time to get through everything, so I'm going to do a real rapid fire through the last few slides we didn't have a chance to get through, talking about human DNA. We mentioned at the end of the class that DNA is information. Well, basically, a good way of thinking about it is it's a blueprint. DNA is the blueprint to build biological organisms. And like any blueprint that you've got, whether it be for a house or anything else, the more complex the item is that you want to build, the more information you need. It's like an instruction manual. Earlier in the class, I made the Lego example, the Lego airplane. Well, if Lego has two kits, and one is just to build a little tiny car, and the other kit is to build a giant castle, well, the instruction booklet on how to build a giant castle is going to have a lot more information in it and have a lot more pages than the instruction manual on how to build a little tiny car, because you don't need as much information to build the simpler item. Same thing's true of organisms. So the question that is begged from all of this is, where does that information come from? Well, there's two basic options. Option one for where does the information come from is from an intelligent mind. And like I said before, we all know plenty of examples in which an intelligent mind can generate information. You just look at your local bookstore and you're going to see shelves and shelves of examples of where an intelligent mind generated information. The second option is, did it come from a naturalistic process? Well, what kind of naturalistic process are we talking about? Well, generally speaking, the explanation that's offered is random mutation, where something mutates within the DNA chain, and then that mutation then creates new information. All right? When that information is beneficial, it gets selected for survival through natural selection. And when it's not beneficial, then it gets weeded out. Well, that sounds all well and good, but it's kind of simplistic. You've got to ask yourself, dig a little bit deeper and ask, well, how could this actually happen? Well, where in the DNA chain are you proposing that this mutation occurred? Again, two options. Option one is, well, there's coding portions of the DNA, which are portions of the DNA that are responsible for coding for proteins. and non-coding DNA, or what is sometimes called junk DNA, which is not coding for proteins. Now, I will say that there's a growing view in the scientific community that there might not be any such thing as junk DNA, as all DNA may actually serve some purpose. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and assume that there are some elements, some portions of the DNA chain that are non-coding and therefore maybe a little bit safer to have some random mutations occurring that could be useful for something else. Now here's the problem. Let's assume that these mutations happen in the non-coding portions of DNA. Given the large number of, just so I can explain myself a little more thoroughly, what that means is that there's some portions of the DNA where it's not coding for protein, so it's kind of safe. You can mess around with that a little bit, and it's not going to destroy the organism. All right, because that part of the DNA chain maybe isn't as important as something that is. It's kind of like when you put something together from IKEA and you always have a few pieces left over, right? We're messing with those leftover pieces that aren't really necessary for the bookshelf that you're building, not for the more necessary screws that if you don't put them in right, the whole thing falls apart. The problem with even that, though, is that given the large number of possible sequences that you could come up with, the odds of finding any combination that's actually functional, that's useful, that would be selected for survival, is way too low to account for the rate of development that we see in the fossil record. In other words, if naturalism is true, then you've got to have these mutations occurring often enough to explain how fast, supposedly, one organism is evolving into another. And it just isn't there. The odds of that happening, even if that could happen, it wouldn't be happening at a speed fast enough to account for those changes. And obviously the problem if you have these mutations in the coding part of the DNA should be even more obvious, is the overwhelming odds are, if you have a mutation in the coding part of the DNA, the overwhelming odds are any such mutation is going to be detrimental to an organism, not beneficial. All right? I mean, it's going to be bad, not good. And if it's bad, it's going to be weeded out by natural selection. And it's going to be weeded out long before any kind of new, novel, functional gene sequence was actually formed. Again, the allegiance we see to Darwinism here as an explanation is stacking the deck. It's deciding in advance that no other explanation is going to do except for a naturalistic one. In any other scenario, if we were just look merely at the probabilities, at the odds of all of this happening, everything happening that would be necessary for Darwinian evolution to be true, the odds of it all happening are overwhelmingly improbable. And if we were looking at this in any other environment, we would reject those odds. And yet, for some reason, if you're committed to a naturalistic explanation, you can't allow yourself to consider any other types of explanations, then you have to accept them. You have to accept those odds. Finally, another typical objection that comes, we talked about briefly earlier, and that is the less than optimal design. A lot of people will say there are alleged design flaws in nature. But remember what we talked about at the beginning of the class here, and that's that we're not claiming that we live in an optimally designed universe. We're only claiming that we live in a designed universe, designed but fallen. And so the fact that we can look at certain elements of design and recognize that, yeah, maybe that's not the most efficient design, only points out that we are living, it confirms that we're living in a fallen world. And like I said before, even if you look at a watch and realize, hey, I could have made a more efficient watch, it doesn't mean that that watch was not designed. You can still look at that watch and recognize that it was designed. Maybe it could have been better, but it was still designed. And that's what the argument here from design actually says. It doesn't mean everything has to be perfect. It just means that we can look at the universe, look at biology, and see that, yeah, it must have been designed. That's the most logical inference based upon the information that we currently have. A couple other problems that naturalistic biology has that come up a lot, and these could be classes in and of themselves. We're not going to go into all of that. One is abiogenesis. That's a fancy word for where does life come from. Understand that even if Darwinian evolution is true, it only explains how one pre-existing organism evolves into another organism. It can't explain how that first organism began in the first place. And the other one is the Cambrian explosion. There's a period of approximately 20 million years, which occurred according to evolutionary science, about 530 to 550 million years ago, in which virtually all body plans, all novel body plans appeared quite suddenly, far too rapidly, naturalistic evolution to be true. If you think about it this way, the picture on the screen shows the animal kingdom. And we have categories called taxonomic categories. If you start at the narrow, like an individual creature, and then they belong to a larger category. And then you can divide that and bring in more creatures, and it belongs to an even larger category, and so on and so on and so on, until you get to all life. Well, the kind of third category from the top, which is called the phylum category, is where you can divide all animal life into certain body types, into certain general body types. During this period of the Cambrian explosion, over a period of approximately 20 million years, virtually every single body type that we see today came into existence. It may seem like a long period of time, 20 million years, but according to evolutionary biology, on the evolutionary scale, that's essentially the blink of an eye. So what you have is basically a really long period of nothing happening, nothing happening, nothing happening, nothing happening. Then all of a sudden, boom, everything happening, and then things slow down again. That's not the pattern you would expect to see if naturalistic evolution were true. That's what we missed by having to end the class early, and even that was kind of a rapid fire, wrapping it all up, but hopefully it'll be helpful. If you're watching this on video, please make sure you tune in again next week, where we're finally going to be focusing more on Christ. So far, the first 2 weeks have been focusing on the existence of God. Next week, we turn our attention to the person of Christ. Thank you very much. God bless. Hey, thanks for watching. Trinity Lutheran Church can be found at 1100 Philadelphia Road in Joppa, Maryland. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you like this video, go ahead and click the like button. That's a thumbs up button right here on the YouTube page. And you could also be a big help to us if you'd go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and God bless.